The storm came down on the capital like judgment, as if the sky had spent years storing up its cruelty and finally chose tonight to spend it all at once. Isabella Morgan walked through the flooded street with nothing left to lose but the two small lives wrapped against her chest. She was 23, orphaned since childhood, and until 3 days ago she had believed that honest work was enough to keep a roof over her children's heads. It wasn't. A stolen necklace she never touched, a household that needed someone to blame. And now, no home, no wages, no name that anyone in this city would trust again. Before we begin, comment below. Where are you watching from tonight? Now, picture this. A mother kneeling in freezing rain, shielding her babies with nothing but her own body, and a feared king kneeling beside her, making a promise that changes everything. Subscribe now. This story is only just beginning. She ducked beneath the broken awning of an abandoned building, curling her body around Ethan and Emma like a wall against the rain. She had stopped asking the world for mercy a long time ago. She had learned that mercy wasn't something poor women were given. It was something they had to survive without. Then the air changed. Footsteps, unhurried, deliberate, crossed the flooded street toward her. She didn't look up at first. She had learned that looking up at a stranger's face rarely changed what happened next. But this stranger knelt. A man in a black crown, rain running down a face carved from centuries rather than years. The kingdom had a name for him, the King of Darkness, the Vampire King who had not shown mercy to anyone in 300 years. And yet here he was, lowering himself into the flooded street before a homeless maid, his crimson eyes wet with something that wasn't rain. He extended his hand. "Why are you carrying Miss Payne alone?" His voice was quiet, but it filled the whole alley. "Hold my hand until dawn. And as long as I breathe, no one will ever take your twins away from you." If you love stories where even the coldest hearts learn to hope again, subscribe and stay with us until the very end. Isabella stared at his open palm. She did not reach for it. Not yet. Because a woman who has been betrayed by everyone who ever promised her safety does not hand over her children's future to a stranger's hand, no matter how gently it's offered, no matter how badly she wants to believe him. Introduction. She had heard the rumors, same as everyone in the kingdom, that Raphael Nightshade had not shown warmth to a living soul in 3 centuries, that his crown was carved from cruelty, and his silence was the silence of something that had long since stopped being human in any way that mattered. But rumors could not explain why he knelt in the mud for a stranger. They could not explain the grief hiding behind his crimson eyes, a grief so old it had calcified into something the kingdom mistook for menace. What no one knew, what even Isabella could not yet guess, was that Raphael was not looking at a poor mother sheltering her children from a storm. He was looking at a memory, a wife, 2 infants, a night 300 years ago when he had come home too late to save any of them. Isabella did not know this. All she knew was that a man the entire kingdom feared had knelt before her, and for the first time since she had been thrown into the street, someone had looked at her, really looked at her, and seen a mother worth protecting, not a burden worth discarding. She had spent every day since Ethan and Emma were born giving away pieces of herself so they could survive. She had never once let herself hope that someone else might carry part of that weight. Now, kneeling in front of her, was a king who understood loss better than she could have imagined, and a promise that would change both their lives long before either of them understood why. What Isabella didn't know that night, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was the story that had shaped the man kneeling before her. To understand why Raphael Nightshade, the King of Darkness, would kneel for a stranger in the rain, you have to go back 300 years, to the night he lost everything. Let me know if you want me to tighten the word count for narration pacing, or draft chapter 1 in the same voice as this hook. Isabella never remembered deciding to reach for his hand. One moment she was staring at his open palm, certain that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. The next, her fingers were closing around his, and the King of Darkness was lifting her, and Ethan, and Emma, out of the flooded alley, as if they weighed nothing at all. The black carriage waited at the mouth of the street, its horses steaming in the cold, its doors marked with a crest she didn't recognize, but somehow already feared. Raphael carried her the entire distance, his cloak thrown over all three of them, shielding the twins from the rain with his own body. The guards at the carriage door went rigid when they saw her. "Your Majesty," one began, his eyes flicking from Isabella's soaked, ragged dress to the crown on Raphael's head, as if the two things could not possibly belong in the same sentence. "Open the door," Raphael said, and there was nothing in his voice that invited argument. The guard obeyed, but Isabella saw the look that passed between him and the other soldiers. Disbelief, alarm. In 300 years, that look seemed to say their king had never once carried a human woman through the palace gates, let alone one dressed in rags holding two crying infants. With mud still clinging to her bare feet, Isabella pressed the twins tighter to her chest and said nothing. She had learned long ago that the moment you started explaining yourself to people who had already decided what you were, you had already lost. The castle rose out of the storm like something carved from a nightmare and a cathedral at once. Black spires, red-lit windows, banners that seemed to drink the light instead of reflecting it. But inside, it was warm, warmer than anywhere Isabella had been in weeks. A woman with kind eyes and trembling hands took the twins from her only long enough to wrap them in dry blankets, and Isabella nearly wept at the sight of Ethan's small fist unclenching for the first time that night. Someone brought milk, still warm, and Isabella fed Emma with hands that shook from more than cold. Then came the offers. A servant appeared with a dress of deep green silk, the kind of fabric Isabella had only ever dusted, never touched. Another offered a chest of jewelry, murmuring that His Majesty wished her to have whatever she required. A third asked, with poorly hidden curiosity, whether she would like her own attendants. Isabella looked at all of it, the silk, the gold, the offer of servants who would answer to her, and shook her head. "I don't need any of this." The servants exchanged glances, unsure if she had misunderstood. "What I need," Isabella said, holding Emma a little closer, "is a warm room for my son, milk for my daughter, and honest work, so that whatever I'm given here, I've earned." Silence settled over the room. Raphael, who had been standing near the doorway, watching without a word, tilted his head slightly, as though she had spoken a language he hadn't heard in centuries. "You could have anything in this castle," he said quietly. "Jewels, gold, a title, if you wished it." "I've never wanted anything I didn't earn," Isabella said. "Wanting things like that is how people like the Ashbournes end up believing they're entitled to the rest of us." She hadn't meant it as an accusation of him, but something flickered behind his crimson eyes anyway. Recognition, maybe, or shame on behalf of every noble who had ever mistaken cruelty for privilege. He didn't argue with her again. By nightfall, word of the maid with 2 babies had spread through every corridor of the castle like smoke under a door. "She's bewitched him," Isabella heard one servant whisper to another, believing she was out of earshot. 300 years, and he's never so much as looked twice at a human woman. "Poor thing," said another, softer. "Did you see her hands? She's been starving for weeks, I'd wager." Not everyone was kind. Some looked at her the way one looks at something dangerous, a stray dog that might still bite, no matter how gently it was fed. Lucian, Raphael's guard, found his king alone on the ramparts that evening, rain still falling in a thin, tired drizzle. "The noble houses will hear of this by morning," Lucian said without preamble. "A human woman in the royal wing with children. They'll call it weakness. Some will call it worse. Let them call it whatever they like. Your Majesty, I said let them, Lucian. Raphael's voice was quiet but final. I have spent 300 years giving this kingdom exactly what it feared. For one night, I would like to give it something else. Lucian said nothing more, but he did not look convinced. It was well past midnight when Isabella woke to an unfamiliar silence. No rain against a broken roof, no cold seeping into her bones, only the strange, suffocating comfort of a warm bed. She rose out of habit, some deep, exhausted instinct pulling her toward the nursery to check on Ethan and Emma before she could even fully open her eyes. She found Raphael there first. He stood in the doorway of the nursery, still in the same rain-soaked coat from hours before, watching the twins sleep with an expression Isabella had not expected to see on the face of a man the entire kingdom called a monster. His shoulders, always so rigid, so composed, had curved forward slightly, as though some old weight had settled there and refused to leave. He didn't look like the King of Darkness. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a memory he couldn't quite escape. Isabella opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Ethan stirred in his crib. Small fingers uncurled in his sleep and reached upward blindly the way infants do, and found Raphael's hand resting on the edge of the crib. Tiny fingers closed around one of his. Raphael went very still. For 300 years, the hunger inside him had never once gone quiet. Not during feasts, not during battles, not during the long, sleepless centuries of grief, but standing there with an infant's hand wrapped trustingly around his finger, something in him finally, impossibly, settled. For the first time since the night he lost everything, Raphael Nightshade felt no darkness at all. By morning, Raphael had already given the order. Find everything, he told Lucian, standing in the cold light of the war room where kings before him had planned battles, not investigations into a maid's stolen necklace, her employers, her dismissal, every detail, no matter how small. Lucian hesitated. You believe there's more to this than a servant caught stealing? I believe, Raphael said, that a woman who refused jewels, refused gold, refused a title, is not the kind of woman who steals rubies from her mistress's dressing table. The investigation unearthed a life Isabella had never spoken of, not even to Raphael. She had come to the Ashbourne mansion at 16, an orphan with no family name worth mentioning, grateful for a roof and a wage, however small. For 7 years she scrubbed floors, mended linens, and stood silent in corners while nobles discussed politics over wine, never once complaining, never once stealing so much as a crust of bread, though hunger gnawed at her most nights. She had been, by every account gathered, the most trusted maid in the household. Until Ethan and Emma were born, Lady Celeste Ashbourne had not wanted a nursing mother under her roof. A maid with children was a maid with divided loyalty, divided time, a burden, in Celeste's words, that the household could no longer justify feeding. Lord Victor had agreed easily enough. Isabella had overheard them discussing it once, in low voices behind a half-closed door, debating how best to be rid of her without appearing cruel. 3 days later, Lady Celeste's ruby necklace disappeared from her dressing table. The accusation came in front of the entire household. Servants, guards, even the cook, gathered in the main hall as Lady Celeste pointed a trembling finger at Isabella and declared loudly enough for the street outside to hear that the maid had stolen from her. Isabella had not begged for mercy. She had begged only for time. "Search my room," she had said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Search everything I own. I have taken nothing." Lord Victor had not searched anything. He had simply ordered her out, twins and all, into a storm that showed no more mercy than he had. Raphael read the account twice, his jaw tightening with each line, before he noticed what should have troubled the Ashbournes far more than it seemed to. The theft was never reported to the royal guard, he said, setting the report down. Lucian frowned. Perhaps they saw no need. A servant thrown into the street. A priceless ruby necklace vanishes from a noble household, and they don't demand a single soldier search for it? Raphael's voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. No investigation. No reward posted for its return. No formal complaint filed with the crown. He looked up. They didn't want the necklace back, Lucien. They wanted Isabella gone. The theft was never about the jewels at all. You think the accusation was staged. I think, Raphael said slowly, that somebody wanted a reason to throw a poor maid and her infant children into the street where no one would think twice about what happened to them next. The question that followed was one neither of them could yet answer. Why? While Raphael turned the mystery over in the war room, Isabella found herself increasingly aware of the castle's other secrets, the ones whispered in corridors when the speakers thought no one was listening. She heard it first from two young maids folding linens near the nursery, their voices low but not quite low enough. Had a wife, they say, centuries ago, and children too, before. Hush, you shouldn't speak of it. Not where the guards might hear. I only meant it explains why he's never once looked at another woman until now. Not since whatever happened to them. Isabella said nothing, only listened. Something cold settling in her chest that she couldn't quite name. She thought of Raphael standing in the nursery doorway the night before, the way his shoulders had curved forward as though bracing against some invisible weight. The way he had gone still when Ethan's small hand curled around his finger. She found Lucien later that evening, standing guard near the western hall, and asked him plainly, "Is it true that he had a family once?" Lucien's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes closed like a door. "That is not my story to tell, my lady. I'm not asking for the whole story, only whether it's true. Some things are His Majesty's alone to share," Lucien said, and though his voice remained respectful, there was no give in it at all. "If he wishes you to know, he will tell you himself." Isabella did not push further, but she carried the question with her long after Lucien had returned to his post, turning it over the way she once turned over unexplained fevers in patients she'd nursed, certain there was a wound beneath it, even if she couldn't yet see where it bled. It was nearly midnight when Raphael, still turning the Ashbourne mystery over in his mind, ordered a quiet search of Lord Victor's private correspondence, a search conducted not by soldiers who might draw attention, but by a single silent servant, loyal only to the crown. What returned to him near midnight was a single sealed letter, its wax broken and hastily resealed, hidden in the lining of a traveling case Lord Victor had used only weeks before Isabella's dismissal. Raphael read it once by candlelight, then again, slower, as though rereading might change what the words plainly said. Thashdri. The Morgan twins must be removed from the household before the bloodline awakening draws further attention. The prophecy cannot be allowed to reach maturity under Ashbourne roof. Better she is cast out now, unwitting, than for anyone to discover what those children may become. Raphael set the letter down very carefully as though it might shatter. Isabella had not been thrown into the street because of a stolen necklace. She had been thrown into the street because someone with knowledge of ancient prophecy, someone with reason to fear it, had wanted Ethan and Emma gone before anyone learned what they truly were. And whoever that someone was, Raphael realized with a cold certainty settling deep in his chest, they were not finished yet. Raphael did not sleep that night. He sat alone in the war room with the Ashbourne letter before him and, beside it, a book older than the castle itself, its leather spine cracked, its pages the color of dried blood. The Prophecy of the Divided Crown, the vampire records called it. Raphael had read it once, centuries ago, as a young king still learning the weight of his throne, and had dismissed it then as superstition too old to matter. He did not dismiss it now. Twins born to a human mother beneath the light of the blood moon shall carry within them the power to end the vampire throne, or to heal the curse that binds its king. The bloodline shall awaken when innocence meets darkness willingly, and from that meeting the world shall be remade, for ruin or for mercy. Raphael closed the book slowly. Ethan and Emma had been born 7 months ago. He did not need to check the royal astronomer's records to know what he already suspected, that a blood moon had risen over the kingdom on the night of their birth. He remembered it. Every vampire in the kingdom remembered it. The way the sky had turned the color of an old wound. Someone else had remembered it too. Someone who had gone looking for twins born beneath that same sky and found them in the arms of a maid in the Ashbourne household, and had moved quickly to be rid of her before anyone else noticed what she carried. Raphael sat with that truth long after the candles had burned low and understood, with a cold and growing dread, that the danger to Isabella and her children had never truly ended in that rain-soaked alley. It had only just begun. He told her everything the following morning because he could not bring himself to lie to a woman who had already lost everything to other people's secrets. Isabella listened in silence as he spoke of the prophecy, of the blood moon, of the letter hidden in Lord Victor's traveling case. When he finished, she said nothing for a long moment, her arms tightening instinctively around Emma, who slept against her shoulder, unaware that her small life had already become the center of a war she hadn't asked to be part of. "They wanted me gone," Isabella said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "because of what my children might become. Yes, not because I stole anything, not because of anything I did at all." She looked up at him, something raw and frightened breaking through the composure she had held on to since the night in the rain. "My children have been hunted since the day they were born, and I never knew. Isabella, I need to leave." She was already moving, already reaching for the small bag of belongings she had refused to give up despite every offer of finer things. "If this is about them, about what they are, then the farther I am from your world, the safer they'll be. I should never have come here. Running will not make them safer." Raphael's voice was calm, though something urgent moved beneath it. "Whoever wants your children knew about the prophecy before I did. They have resources, patience, and a reach I do not yet understand. Out there, alone, you would have no protection at all. And in here?" Isabella's voice cracked. "In here, I'm surrounded by nobles who already hate me, guards who whisper that I've bewitched their king, and a danger you yourself only discovered last night. Tell me honestly, Raphael, is that safer?" He did not answer with words. He knelt. Just as he had that first night in the rain, Raphael lowered himself before her, his crimson eyes level with hers, refusing to let the crown or the throne stand between them. "I will not imprison you here," he said quietly. "If you wish to leave, I will not stop you. I will give you every guard I can spare, every resource this crown possesses, and I will not ask you to stay a single hour longer than you choose. But I am begging you, Isabella, do not walk into that darkness alone. Not when I have only just learned how deep it runs." Isabella's arms trembled around her daughter. When she spoke, it was not with anger, but with the quiet, unbearable honesty of a woman who had nothing left to protect except the truth. "I have nothing in this world except Ethan and Emma," she whispered. "No family, no home, no name anyone respects. If something happens to them because I made the wrong choice, then let me protect your whole world," Raphael said. "All of it, not because of a prophecy, not because of a crown, because I could not save the family I lost once, and I refuse to fail another." Isabella stared at him, rain-soaked memory and present grief tangled together in his crimson eyes, and for the first time since the night they met she let herself believe, however fragile the hope, that perhaps she was not entirely alone in this. She opened her mouth to answer. Glass shattered somewhere above them. The scream came from the nursery. Raphael was moving before the sound had even finished echoing down the corridor, faster than human eyes could follow, Isabella sprinting behind him with her heart in her throat. They reached the nursery to find the window broken inward, rain and wind pouring through the jagged opening, and two cloaked figures already inside the room, standing over Ethan's crib. "Get away from him!" Isabella screamed. But Raphael was already there, a blur of black and crimson, seizing the nearest attacker by the throat before the man could so much as turn. The second assassin lunged for the crib. Raphael threw the first attacker aside hard enough to crack the stone wall and close the distance in a single stride, seizing the second man's wrist a breath before his blade could reach the sleeping child. Ethan began to cry, startled awake by the chaos, his small voice filling the ruined nursery. Raphael's grip tightened until the assassin's blade clattered uselessly to the floor. "Who sent you?" Raphael demanded, his voice a low and terrible thing, nothing like the man who had knelt in front of Isabella only moments before. The assassin said nothing. He only smiled, thin and knowing, before a sudden convulsion took him, poison. Self-administered, his body already too far gone to answer any question at all. Raphael let the body fall and turned to find Isabella pressed against the wall. Emma clutched to her chest, staring at the broken window with wide, terrified eyes. The danger she had feared out in the world had already found its way inside the castle walls. The bodies were removed before dawn. The broken window sealed with iron and vampire wardings that Raphael swore no blade would breach again. But it was not the wards that made Isabella feel safe that night. It was the man who refused to leave the nursery, standing sentinel by the door for hours after the last guard had gone. She had seen him fight, truly fight, for the first time that morning, and it had frightened her in a way she hadn't expected. There had been nothing careful in the way he moved, nothing that resembled mercy. He had thrown a grown man into solid stone as though he weighed nothing at all, his crimson eyes gone dark with a fury that seemed older than the crown on his head. For one terrible moment, Isabella had understood exactly why the kingdom called him the King of Darkness. But then he had turned back toward the crib, and everything about him had changed. He lifted Emma from where she'd been startled awake, and his hands, the same hands that had crushed a man's wrist without effort, trembled slightly as he cradled her against his chest. He held her the way one might hold something made of glass, his shoulders curved protectively around her small, crying body, his voice dropping to a murmur so soft, Isabella almost didn't recognize it as his. "You're safe," he whispered to the baby, over and over, as though he needed to hear it as much as she did. "You're safe. I have you." Isabella stood in the doorway and watched a man capable of terrible violence rock her daughter to sleep with more tenderness than she had seen from anyone since her own mother had died. She understood in that moment that she was looking at two halves of the same grief. That night, once the twins had finally settled and the castle had gone quiet around them, Isabella found Raphael on the same balcony where Lucian had confronted him days before, staring out at a sky finally free of rain. "You didn't have to stay," she said, joining him at the railing. "I did." His voice was low. "I told you I would protect your whole world. I meant it." She was quiet for a moment, studying the tired lines of his face, the exhaustion he carried like armor beneath the crown. "Lucian wouldn't tell me," she said finally, "about your family. He said it wasn't his story to share." Raphael didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone somewhere distant, somewhere old. "I had a wife," he said, "Marguerite, and 2 children, twins, as it happens. Though I didn't understand the cruelty of that coincidence until I met yours." He paused, his jaw tightening. 300 years ago, enemies of the crown moved against my kingdom while I was away defending its borders. I thought I had secured every threat. I thought my family was safe behind castle walls, stronger than any army could break. Isabella said nothing, sensing there was more, and that he needed the silence to find it. I was wrong, Raphael said. They came at night, while I was 2 days' ride away. By the time word reached me and I returned, there was nothing left to defend. Only bodies. His voice cracked, just slightly, 300 years of grief pressing through a crack that had never fully healed. I held them until dawn. I couldn't make myself let go before then. I kept thinking if I just held on long enough, something might change. Nothing did. Raphael, I have ruled this kingdom for 3 centuries, he continued, and in all that time I have never once forgiven myself for being 2 days too late. Every decision I have made since then has been about making certain I am never too late again. And yet, he looked toward the nursery window, still faintly illuminated in the dark. Yet here I am again, with a family under my protection, and already assassins have broken through walls I swore no one could breach. Isabella stepped closer, understanding his pain in a way words could barely reach. She had spent her whole life without parents, without safety, without anyone who stayed. She knew what it was to carry grief like a second skin, to believe that loss was simply the price of loving anything at all. I know what it is to survive without hope, she said quietly. I spent years believing the world had simply forgotten I existed, that no one was coming to save me, so I had better learn to save myself. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she did not see the king of darkness. The kingdom feared. She saw a man who had been grieving, quietly and completely, for 300 years. You're not a monster, Raphael. You're just the loneliest man I've ever met. Something in his expression broke open, raw and unguarded. I cannot love again, Isabella. Not truly. Everyone I have ever loved has died because of it. My wife, my children. I will not let that be your fate, or Ethan and Emma's. You don't get to decide that alone, Isabella said softly. I have decided on it for 300 years. Then maybe, she said, reaching out and taking his hand. The same hand that had once extended toward her in the rain. The same hand her son had gripped without fear. It's time to decide something different. Raphael looked down at her fingers wrapped around his, and for a moment he said nothing at all. Maybe you were not meant to save them then, Isabella whispered, her voice steady despite the ache behind it. Maybe you are meant to save us now. The royal court had not seen a human woman brought before it in 3 centuries, and the whispers began the moment Isabella crossed the threshold of the great hall, Ethan on her hip, Emma cradled in the arms of a nursemaid who walked 1 step behind her. The nobles rose from their seats, not out of respect, Isabella understood immediately, but out of shock. Rows of pale, ancient faces turned toward her, some curious, most cold, a few openly hostile. She had faced hunger, homelessness, and rain that showed no mercy. She told herself she could face this too. Raphael stood at the head of the hall, crowned and unmoving, and when Isabella reached his side, he did something that sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the court. He took her hand. Hear me, Raphael said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall without effort. This woman, Isabella Morgan, and her children, Ethan and Emma, are under the protection of the crown. From this day forward, any threat against them is a threat against the throne itself. For a moment, the hall was silent with disbelief. Then it broke apart entirely. She has bewitched him, a noble woman near the front cried, rising to her feet. A human maid, elevated above centuries of loyal houses. This is an insult to every family in this court. Another voice snarled. A servant, accused of theft, and your majesty would have us believe she deserves the crown's protection? Isabella felt her pulse hammering in her throat, but she lifted her chin and did not look away from the sea of hostile faces. She had bowed her head to enough cruel people in her life. She would not do it here, not while her children were in the room. Then the crowd parted, and Lord Victor Ashbourne stepped forward, Lady Celeste at his side, her expression arranged into practiced sorrow. "Your Majesty," Lord Victor said smoothly, "we did not wish to bring this before the court, but if the crown insists on defending this woman, then the truth must be spoken. She stole from our household. A ruby necklace, priceless and irreplaceable, vanished the very week she was dismissed." "A convenient story," Raphael said, "for a theft that was never reported to the royal guard." A ripple of confusion moved through the hall. "We saw no need to trouble the crown with a servant's crime," Lady Celeste said quickly. "No," Raphael said. "You saw no need to report a theft because there was no theft to report." He nodded once, and a guard stepped forward, presenting a small velvet box to the court. Raphael opened it himself, and the light of the hall caught on a deep red stone. Gasps rippled through the room. "Lady Celeste's ruby necklace," Raphael said, "found not in Isabella Morgan's possession, but hidden in Lady Celeste's own private chamber, exactly where it had been all along." Lady Celeste's face was drained of color. Lord Victor's composure cracked for the first time, his mouth opening without sound. "The accusation against Isabella Morgan was never about a necklace," Raphael continued, his voice hardening with every word. "It was staged, deliberately, to remove her and her children from your household before anyone discovered the truth of what her twins carry." The hall fell, utterly silent. Lord Victor's eyes flicked toward Isabella, calculating before something desperate settled over his features. The look of a man who understood he had already lost and had decided to take everyone down with him. "Then let the court hear the truth in full," Lord Victor said, his voice rising. "Those children are not ordinary infants. They were born beneath the blood moon. According to the old prophecies, the Morgan twins carry a bloodline capable of destroying this very throne." He turned to face the assembled nobles. "We did not cast this woman out to be cruel. We cast her out because we understood the danger her children pose, a danger this court deserves to know before the crown places them at the heart of the palace." The hall erupted. "The prophecy is real then. The children must be removed, for the kingdom's safety, if the throne itself is at risk." Isabella's arms tightened around Ethan as the shouting rose around her, dozens of voices debating her children's fate as though they were nothing more than a political problem to be solved. She felt Emma's nursemaid step closer, instinctively protective, and Isabella's heart pounded with a fear sharper than anything she had felt even in the rain that first night. "Enough," the single word, cut through the chaos like a blade. Raphael's eyes had gone fully crimson, the colors spreading until no trace of their usual depth remained, and the temperature in the hall seemed to drop with his fury. Nobles who had been shouting a moment before fell utterly silent, some visibly stepping back from the throne. "These children," Raphael said, each word deliberate and cold, "are under the protection of this crown. Not as a matter of prophecy, not as a matter of politics, as a matter of my word, given freely, and I do not break my word." He stepped forward, placing himself bodily between Isabella and the assembled court, his voice dropping into something far more dangerous than shouting. "Whoever reaches for those children," Raphael said, "loses the hand first." No one spoke, no one dared. Lord Victor bowed stiffly, his expression unreadable, and retreated with Lady Celeste through the parting crowd. But Isabella did not miss the look that passed between several nobles as they watched the Ashbournes go. A look of quiet calculation, of alliances already shifting beneath the surface. The court dispersed in uneasy silence, but Isabella understood, standing there with her children in her arms, that nothing had truly been resolved. Raphael had won the argument but not the war. That night, in a chamber far from the royal wing, a small circle of nobles gathered by candlelight, men and women who had bowed to Raphael in the hall, while harboring no intention of accepting his decree. "The king will not listen to reason," one of them said quietly. If he will not remove the children himself, then we will have to do what must be done. And if he catches us, he won't, came the reply, cold and certain. Not before the twins are already gone. Raphael just stood before the entire court and made his warning unmistakably clear. Whoever reaches for those children loses the hand first. But not everyone in that room plans to obey him. Somewhere in the shadows of that very castle, a group of nobles is already gathering, already planning, and this time they have no intention of waiting for permission or facing the king directly. Isabella believes the worst is behind her. She has no idea that the real danger has only just begun to move. If you want to find out whether Raphael can protect the promise he made in the rain, or whether this rebellion finally succeeds where the last one failed, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me who you think is behind it. Because in the next chapter, the storm returns, and this time, blood will fall with the rain. The storm returned 3 nights later, as if the sky itself remembered the night this had all begun. Isabella woke to the sound of shouting in the corridors, and Lucian's fist pounding on her door before she had even risen from bed. "They're here," he said, already scooping Emma from her crib while Isabella grabbed Ethan and her mother's old instincts took over completely. "The rebels. Raphael says the tunnels now. Where is he? Buying us time." Lucian's face was grim in the candlelight. "Move, Isabella, please." She followed him through a hidden passage behind the nursery wall, twins pressed against her chest, her bare feet slapping against cold stone as thunder rolled somewhere above them. Behind her, she could hear the distant clash of steel, the low, terrible sound of Raphael's voice raised in fury. She prayed, for the first time in years, that he would survive the night. The tunnels beneath the castle were narrow and dark, lit only by the torch Lucian carried, and Isabella's heart hammered with every turn, every shadow that seemed to shift at the edge of the light. "How much further?" she whispered. "Not far. There's an exit near the eastern wall, guarded by—" Lucian never finished the sentence. The guard waiting at the tunnel's fork was one Isabella recognized, a quiet man named Bertrand who had brought her milk for Emma on her second night in the castle. He smiled now, but it was not the smile she remembered. "This way, my lady," Bertrand said, gesturing down a passage that led away from the eastern wall entirely. Lucian's blade was already drawn. "That's not the way to the exit." Bertrand's smile widened, and then the torchlight caught steel, not in Bertrand's hand, but in the hands of the men now stepping out of the darkness behind him, more than Isabella could count in the flickering light. "Run," Lucian said, already moving to meet them. Isabella ran. She did not know how long she fled through the tunnels, only that her lungs burned and her arms ached from carrying both children at once, and that every dead end felt like a door closing on the last of her hope. When she finally stumbled into a small stone chamber with no way forward and no way back, she understood with a cold and terrible clarity that she had run out of places to run. 2 of the attackers found her there first. "Give us the children," one of them said, "and you may yet live to see the morning." Something in Isabella, something that had survived a mansion's cruelty, a street's indifference, a storm that had once tried to kill her, refused to break. She did not freeze. She set Ethan and Emma gently behind her, against the cold stone wall, and picked up the only weapon the chamber offered, a rusted iron bar, half buried beneath years of dust and neglect. "You will not touch them," she said, and her voice did not shake. The first attacker laughed and lunged for her. Isabella swung the bar with every ounce of desperate strength in her body, catching him across the temple hard enough to send him crashing into the wall. The second came at her from the side, but years of exhaustion and grief had taught Isabella how to fight for things worth keeping, and she twisted away, driving her elbow into his throat before he could reach her children. It was not enough. More were coming, their footsteps echoing down the tunnel, And Isabella knew, with her back against stone and her babies crying behind her, that she could not hold them all. Raphael arrived like something out of a nightmare, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his crown gone, his crimson eyes blazing with a fury 3 centuries in the making. He did not slow to fight fairly. Forbidden magic, older than the castle itself, tore through the tunnel in a wave of black flame, and the attackers who had cornered Isabella and her children screamed once, before falling silent forever. The stone walls cracked under the force of it. The air itself seemed to bend. Isabella felt the power roll over her like a physical blow and understood, watching Raphael's body shudder from the force of what he had unleashed, that this magic had a price he was paying with every breath he took. The last attacker fled into the dark. Raphael did not chase him. He turned instead toward Isabella, toward Ethan and Emma, still crying but unharmed, and something in his crimson eyes cleared for just a moment. Relief, raw and complete, before his legs gave out beneath him. Raphael! Isabella caught him before he hit the stone floor, his weight nearly buckling her knees, blood soaking through her nightgown where his wounds pressed against her. His skin had gone gray, his breathing shallow and uneven, the same signs of a body pushed far past its limits that she had seen in dying patients long before she had ever known his name. "The twins," he whispered, barely audible. "Are they? They're safe. You saved them." Her hands pressed desperately against the worst of his wounds, though some instinct deep inside her already understood this was not an injury that pressure alone could heal. "Raphael, stay with me, please." Outside, through the broken stone above the tunnel, the first gray light of dawn began to bleed into the storm-dark sky, and in Isabella's arms, the King of Darkness, who had once knelt before a stranger in the rain and promised to protect her world, finally closed his eyes. They carried him to the healer's chamber, but Isabella knew, even before the vampire physicians began their frantic work, that this was not a wound that could be stitched or bandaged away. "The magic he used," the eldest healer said quietly, her hands hovering uselessly over Raphael's chest. "It's forbidden for a reason. It draws on the very core of what keeps an immortal alive. His blood is poisoned by his own power, and I have no cure that can reverse it before sunrise." "Then find one," Isabella said, her voice cracking. "There has to be something. My lady, in 300 years, no vampire has survived this magic once unleashed." The healer's eyes were gentle but final. "I am sorry." The room emptied slowly, healers and guards retreating with the particular quiet of people who had already accepted a loss. Isabella refused to accept it all. She sat beside his bed and did not move. It was the strangest kind of mirror, Isabella thought, staring at Raphael's pale, still face in the candlelight. Weeks ago, she had been the one waiting for death, cold, abandoned, certain that morning would find her body in some forgotten alley with her children beside her. She had believed, in her darkest moments, that no one in the world would kneel beside her and refuse to let go. Then Raphael had knelt. Now it was her turn. "You don't get to do this," she whispered, taking his hand in both of hers, the same hand that had once reached for her in the rain. "You promised me. You said no one would ever take my children away from me. You can't make a promise like that and then leave us." His breathing was shallow, uneven, his skin cold in a way that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "I have spent my whole life being left," Isabella said, tears finally breaking free, the ones she had held back through every hour of that terrible night. "My parents, every employer who threw me away, every person who decided I wasn't worth staying for. I promised myself I would never let myself need anyone again." Her voice broke completely. "And then you knelt in the rain, and you ruined that promise, and now you want to leave too?" She pressed his hand against her cheek, her tears falling freely now, unable to stop them even as she'd wanted to. "So don't," she begged. Don't let death take you from us, not after everything, not now." Behind her, Ethan began to cry, startled awake by his mother's grief, and Emma's small voice joined his a moment later, the two of them wailing in the quiet chamber. Isabella turned, torn between comforting her children and refusing to release Raphael's hand, and in the end, some instinct she didn't fully understand made her lift both twins onto the bed beside him instead. Ethan's small hand landed on Raphael's wrist. Emma's tears, hot and unstoppable, fell onto the back of his cold hand, and something ancient stirred. It began as warmth, faint at first, so subtle Isabella nearly missed it beneath her own grief. Then it spread, golden light bleeding up from beneath Raphael's skin where the twins' tears had fallen, tracing through his veins like dawn breaking across a night sky. The prophecy buried in records older than the castle itself had promised destruction or healing, and Isabella understood now, watching the poison in Raphael's blood retreat before a light that came from nothing but innocent grief and unconditional love. Which truth the bloodline had chosen, not ruin, mercy. The twins' tears did not curse the King of Darkness. They reached into the part of him that 300 years of grief had buried beneath duty and vengeance and endless, solitary guilt, and gently, impossibly, they began to restore it. Raphael's breathing steadied. The gray had begun to leave his face by the time the first true light of dawn broke through the chamber's windows, gold and pale and utterly unlike the storm that had raged all night. Isabella did not dare hope until his fingers finally moved beneath hers. His eyes opened slowly, crimson dulled with exhaustion, but alive, unmistakably alive, and the first thing he saw was Isabella's face above his, tear-streaked and disbelieving, her hand still wrapped tightly around his. "You're still here?" he whispered, his voice rough with disuse, as though he could not quite believe it. Isabella let out a sound that was half sob, half laughter, pressing his hand against her heart. "You told me to hold your hand until dawn," she said. "I never let go." Raphael's gaze moved past her to the twins curled against his side, Ethan's small fist still resting on his wrist. Emma finally quiet, her tears dried against his skin like something sacred. "They saved me," he said softly, wonder threading through the words. "No," Isabella whispered, brushing damp hair back from his forehead with a tenderness she no longer tried to hide. "We saved each other." That was always how this was going to end. Outside, the storm had finally broken, and dawn spilled gold across a kingdom that did not yet know how close it had come to losing everything, or how much, in this quiet room, had just been given back. The royal court gathered again 3 days later, but this time Raphael did not stand alone at its head. Isabella stood beside him, dressed simply, her chin lifted, Ethan and Emma sleeping peacefully in the arms of the nursemaid nearby. Lord Victor Ashbourne, Lady Celeste Ashbourne. Raphael's voice carried through the hall, cold and absolute. "You staged a false accusation of theft against an innocent woman, cast a mother and her infant children into a storm to die, and when that failed, you conspired with rebel factions of this court to seize those children by force." The hall was silent, every noble present understanding that whatever mercy the crown might once have shown was long since spent. "The evidence has been presented to this court," Raphael continued. "The hidden letter detailing your knowledge of the prophecy, the confession of the guard who betrayed his post and led attackers into the tunnels beneath this castle, the testimony of survivors who watched you flee this hall rather than answer for your crimes. Lord Victor's composure, so carefully maintained through years of noble privilege, finally shattered. Your Majesty, please, you forfeit your titles, your lands, and your wealth. Effective immediately," Raphael said, without pause, without mercy. "You will leave this kingdom before nightfall, And if either of you is found within its borders after tomorrow's dawn, you will answer to the full weight of the crown's justice." Lady Celeste wept. Lord Victor said nothing more, understanding at last that pleading would change nothing. Guards escorted them from the hall, and the assembled nobles watched them go in a silence that spoke louder than any outrage could have. What followed in the days after was something Isabella had never expected in her life. Not vindication, which she had long since stopped hoping for, but something closer to peace. Word spread through the kingdom quickly. The poor maid accused of theft had been innocent all along, cast into a storm by nobles too cruel to admit the truth, and the King of Darkness, feared for 3 centuries as a monster without mercy, had knelt in the rain for a stranger and nearly given his own life to protect her children. The stories the kingdom told about Raphael began to change, not overnight and not completely. Old fears did not vanish so easily, but slowly. In taverns and markets and noble halls alike, people began to speak of their king differently, not as the King of Darkness, as a protector. The court, eager now to make amends for centuries of misunderstanding, offered Isabella a noble title of her own, Lady Morgan, with lands and a household to match her new standing beside the crown. Isabella declined without hesitation. "I have spent my whole life being told what I should want," she told Raphael, the two of them alone in the quiet of the royal library. "Jewels, titles, a name people bow to. None of it was ever what I actually needed, and I won't pretend otherwise now just because the offer finally comes with respect attached to it." "Then what do you want?" Raphael asked, and there was no impatience in the question, only genuine curiosity. "I want to build something," Isabella said. "Shelters, real ones, with warm rooms and honest food, for mothers who've been thrown into the street the way I was, for orphan children who have no one to speak for them, for servants cast out by nobles who've decided their loyalty means nothing the moment it becomes inconvenient." She looked at him steadily. "I know what it is to have no one believe you. I don't want anyone else in this kingdom to feel that alone again." Raphael was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression Isabella had come to recognize, something between admiration and quiet wonder, as though she continually surprised him in ways he hadn't thought possible anymore. "Then it will be done," he said simply. "Whatever you need. Land, funding, my own name behind it if it helps convince this kingdom to finally treat its poorest with some dignity." "That easily?" "You refused a crown, Isabella. The least I can do is grant you shelter." For the first time in longer than she could remember, Isabella laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, and Raphael found himself smiling in a way that felt unfamiliar after 3 centuries of carrying grief like armor. Months passed. The first shelter rose near the eastern quarter of the capital, modest but warm, already filled with mothers and children who had nowhere else to turn. Isabella oversaw its construction herself, insisting on visiting every week despite Raphael's gentle protests that she no longer needed to labor for anything. Old habits, she told him each time, and he had stopped arguing, understanding by now that some things about her would never change, and that he did not actually want them to. On a quiet evening in early autumn, Isabella walked through the royal garden with Ethan toddling unsteadily beside her and Emma balanced on her hip, the two of them babbling nonsense at the flowers as the sky above began to soften into gold. Raphael found her there, as he often did now, no longer lingering in shadowed doorways or hiding behind centuries of careful distance. He walked openly into the light beside her, something he had not done freely in longer than either of them could measure. "I used to walk this garden alone," he said quietly, watching Ethan attempt, unsuccessfully, to catch a fallen leaf. "For 300 years, I told myself I didn't need anything more than duty and solitude. I told myself that was enough. And now I understand that I wasn't meant to replace what I lost. He looked at her, and there was nothing guarded left in his crimson eyes at all. I don't want to replace my family, Isabella. I want to build a new one, with you, with them. He nodded toward the twins. If you let me. Isabella felt her heart swell with something she hadn't dared name until this very moment. The sun broke fully over the garden wall, spilling gold across the grass, across the flowers, across the two of them standing exactly as they had that first stormy night, except this time there was no rain, no fear, no desperate plea for survival. Raphael extended his hand. This time Isabella did not hesitate. She reached out and she held on.